Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. Some of you know and some of you may not know, but SWEAT stands for Strong Women Empowering Achieving Together. And I am super excited to welcome Janice Hisle to the show. Did I say it right?
Yes, correct.
She's gotten married, you guys. I've known Janice for quite some time. I used to, a long while back, be an aerobics coordinator at FitQuest Fitness Centers, and Janice was a bundle of sunshine and energy, and she came on the horizon, and she taught wellness and fitness classes to all of our clientele. And so, and also, you guys are going to find out what a journalist she has been over 27 years in the journalism industry. She was a professional with two disciples, writing and fitness, which I can totally identify with, being an author of 2 books myself. Janice keeps her keyboard almost as active as her feet are. I love that. You're such a good writer. She wrote for the Cincinnati Enquirer. She covered every aspect of the Widmer bathtub drowning case through 3 spellbinding trials, unanswered questions, which compelled her to write her first book for the 10th anniversary of the case, which will be, was Saturday, yes, August 11th, because we were supposed to do this last week. And it was my fault we didn't. After she left the Enquirer in 2013, she became a freelance writer and also continued her work as a fitness instructor and personal trainer. She spent 18 months writing and researching her first book, which I'd say she spent a lot more time than that because she was in the trial and interviewing him, in prison. And so
that was actually just the time that I spent once I started writing the book specifically.
Yeah. So she's very well versed on this subject. Her first book, Submerged, Ryan Widmer, His Drowned Bride and the Justice System. The book is available at thesubmergedbook.com, and it has been selling out, you guys. It's had to be reprinted several times since it was released just 3 weeks ago. And I haven't been able to put it down. I'm not all the way through it yet. But I feel like I've lived this case. So let me, without further ado, welcome Janice Hisle to the show.
Thank you. It's such a privilege to be on the show with you because I've seen your podcast before, and I just thought, well, how does she find these people? So now you found me. So, and I know we've known each other, like you said, for a while, but I hardly ever get to see you in person. So it's actually fun to see you on a podcast.
Well, yeah, it's fun to reconnect and see how we've both grown over the years.
Yeah, and I think we're both holding up pretty well despite the years.
Yeah, you know what? Fitness and writing must be a pretty awesome element.
Yeah, I mean, it's rejuvenative, right? I mean, it's kind of like the fitness stuff is great for your body, and the writing is great for your mind, right?
Right, because it empowers you, and that I'm all about empowerment, not just of women, empowerment of all people. And, just that people are not being oppressed in any way, and they're fully able to speak their truth. So today, we're going to kind of dive into someone else's life, and just, it's going to be a discussion where you, the listener, will come up, we will present the facts, and you will come up with your own truth of what you think happened. So it's not a whodunit, as Janice says. Can you explain why you don't think that this is a whodunit?
Well, some murder cases are a whodunit. Is it this guy or that gal? Who did this? However, in this case, there are only 2 possibilities. It's either a murder or it's actually a medical problem that caused this young lady to drown in the bathtub. And people are very divided on their opinions on, and as soon as somebody forms an opinion, it seems like they pretty much stick to it a lot. However, I've had some people tell me that they've changed their mind over the years. I personally changed my mind many times, and I don't really want to disclose what direction I'm leaning, because I want people to read the book with an open mind and reach their own opinion.
Now, for people that don't live in this area and that may have not heard as much as we did about the case, though I think it was pretty much on a national level.
Yes.
Can you fill people in on exactly what happened?
Sure. I'll give a quick overview of the case. So on August 11th of 2008, so it is 10 years this past Saturday this occurred, there was a situation in a house not far from me, and that's one of the reasons why I stayed so interested. And I would constantly drive past areas that were relevant to this book. And what happened, a young man, only married 4 months, calls 911, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "My wife fell asleep in the bathtub and I think she's dead." Whoa. I mean, that's a very unusual and striking, shocking statement. And from there, he said some things about her condition in the bathtub that some people, dissected this call, sliced and diced it up and down. There were things that he said that people thought didn't sound right. There were actually things that when I spoke to him finally, that he didn't remember saying, he says. Now, you can either believe or disbelieve him on that point. However, it is possible, I think, for a person in a crisis situation to think that you always hear people say things move so quickly, when there's a crisis, and they may not recall exactly what they stated, or who knows, maybe he was lying. That's up for people to decide.
Yeah, so basically though, what are some unusual facts about the case, like as far as, a drowning occurring?
Yeah. Well, I think we've heard of some cases maybe where unfortunately an adult, for example, I remember there was a mother who drowned, her child in the bathtub. I've heard of several cases like that over the years, but it's unusual for an adult to allegedly drown another adult in the bathtub. It's just a very unusual way of killing someone, if that is in fact what happened here. And some people say that, one of the more unusual things about this is, how did he do it without leaving any marks on him, having any marks on himself? No scratch marks, no broken nails on her, no elbows, knees, knuckles, bruised, nothing like that. No sign of, what they call defensive injuries, right? Or on her, and also no marks whatsoever on him. When the police and first responders, emergency crews arrived, he was wearing nothing but his boxer shorts. Now, his statement is that he was downstairs watching television as she was down there with him. They were enjoying their evening together. She says, "Hey, I'm tired. I haven't felt well all day." This is the other thing. She hadn't felt well all day. And she said she was going upstairs to take her bath. Now, she had a number of times when she would fall asleep at unusual times and usual places. Now, there's one of those places was at the Brazen Head. I don't know if you remember that place in Mason.
Yeah, I mean, totally remember it. It's a different restaurant now.
Right, it is, and it looks like it's really nice. I've been wanting to try it. But so she fell asleep there in public in a loud, that place could get loud. If you've ever been there, you know what I mean. And she, it wasn't very late, so it wasn't like she just, had too much to drink and kind of slumped over. It was pretty early in the evening, according to some of the testimony. And it was very usual for a 24-year-old woman to go out and sleep in her car on her lunch hour all the time. And so some people suspected maybe she had narcolepsy, and 80% of people with narcolepsy have bouts of what's called cataplexy, where they actually, all of their voluntary muscles, they lose control of it. It's like a type of paralysis. And if that happens in the bathtub, you can imagine the result would not be good. And there actually have been instances documented along those lines. So people drowning as a result of a cataplexy incident. So that's one of the things that's suspected for her, but there were never any tests done. So that's where the mystery comes in. There were no tests done, but the prosecution side of this is, well, geez, what are the odds that, a 24-year-old woman would suffer from these conditions and, just drown in her bathtub? This just doesn't happen. So that's kind of the crux of the whole case is, is it possible that she suffered from some medical problem that went undetected? And they said, what are the chances of that? But the people who support Ryan Widmer say, she had a greater chance than the normal person because of her history and the fact she didn't feel well that very night, that whole day she didn't feel well. So was there something going on with her?
Didn't they meet like on a blind date at the Brazen Head?
Yes, that's actually where they met. A friend, what happened, Sarah worked with this young lady named Dana Kist, and Dana's husband is named Chris. And Chris was good friends and had been roommates with Ryan. And so they decided, based on the fact that Chris and Ryan had similar personalities, they were both kind of more reserved. They're both kind of they're friendly guys after you kind of get to know them. It takes a while for them to kind of warm up to you. And the ladies, though, were just kind of out there, very exuberant, both ladies.
Where opposites attract.
Yeah, and so Chris and Dana, that couple, they kind of thought, since Ryan and Sarah are good friends separately, are so similar to us, our relationship's great. Maybe theirs would be too. So they played matchmaker.
Oh, yeah. And so
the Brazen Head.
I mean, to all, aspects, I mean, nobody ever heard them fighting, right?
Well, actually, it's interesting. The friends all said that they were almost disgustingly cute together, lovey-dovey, all of that. However, as the trials went on, there was some testimony from Sarah's mother that kind of, she got more critical of Ryan's relationship with his daughter as the trials went on. I'm not sure, how, it wasn't like that all I can say is she originally didn't even use the word argue in the very first trial. And then by the end, she said that they were hateful to each other, but no other witness, not even her friends, described the relationship in this way. So,
okay. Well, I mean, in a marriage, you are going to fight. So, I mean, I still wouldn't think it's a red flag if you're arguing, because that's how you communicate sometimes.
Well, I don't know what the truth is. I, wasn't involved with,
right.
people. I never got to meet Sarah. And I get a little bit emotional sometimes when I think about her, because
I bet
from everything I've heard about her, she's was feisty.
I love that. Yeah.
I have that streak. And I think I really would have liked her based on what I heard about her. It makes me sad that I didn't get the opportunity to know her.
Yeah, sounded like she was a bit spunky, and like opposites, they say opposites attract. And so we all don't really know what goes on behind closed doors, and that's why we're having this discussion, because we're not really sure.
Yeah, that was like a phrase that actually came up in the trials repeatedly by the prosecution. That's what their side of this was. They would constantly say, who knows what lurks behind the doors of a marriage? Who really knows? That's what they would always say.
Okay. Wow. I feel like I was there. Just kidding. So I guess another thing, because I remember this, and so just from memory of listening to it on the news and this and that, was no water. You would think at a drowning, there would be a lot of water. There's no water. She's almost dry.
Right. Well, here is, again, one of those things that people weigh. You can look at it this way or that way. Some people look at the dry conditions reported in the bathroom and on Sarah as very suspicious. However, people who listen carefully to the 911 call and believe Ryan's statement, which was that he instinctively pulled the drain plug when he first encountered her. He sat her up, this is his story, sat her up in the bathtub so she was kind of up against the edge there, kind of cradled her, pulled the drain so that it would start draining, getting her out of the threat of the water. Now, a lot of men in particular, it seems, picture themselves in a situation, they think they would scoop up the entire person.
Yeah, I can't even see undoing the drain.
He says he doesn't know, he just reacted. Again, if you believe his story, this is what the story is. So he said that the water's draining. And so as I describe in my book, Is it possible that as the water level continued to drain, it's exposing more of her body to the air? It's August, the air conditioning is on. Now, they didn't take any atmospheric readings or anything. So to try to recreate the conditions and the length of time it takes to dry would be next to impossible, because that data wasn't available that night. However, the defense did hire an expert to try to calculate the length of time that it would take for a body to dry under these conditions. But for whatever reason, and I don't remember and don't, maybe it was never even disclosed in court what the reasons were, but the judge did not allow that expert to testify. So that was the thing, that was the whole crux of the first trial that made the jury, drove a lot of jurors to just do their own experiments. They wanted, or like, how long does it take a body to air dry? Because the police were there by a certain time. Here's another thing about it. I'll interrupt myself. And
I'm already probably thinking what you're going to say.
No, this is actually something a lot of people don't realize, is that the 911 system in Warren County had a feature where if there was silence on the other end of the line, that the recording would stop. And so there would be time that elapsed with no recording, right? And so the defense later discovered this and said that some of the timing on the 911 call was incorrect. And so they had to do a corrected version of the 911 call even to give a proper length of time. Now, I can't remember without looking it up.
Wasn't it delayed, that the time that she supposedly died and the time he called?
There is a concern that maybe that is what happened. However, there is the other side of the story, is it possible that when the water's draining, she's just getting drier and drier on the front of her body because she was face up, not face down, according to him, that he stated on the call. Again, look at it.
So, okay, so let's go over that. Let's back up. So originally on the 911 call, he stated what?
Face down.
And then later on, he stated
face up. And he actually had, the times I've personally talked to him and the attorney's documents that he allowed me to have access to, which was everything. He let me have access to all of his attorney's documents. Those all are consistent, saying face up, face up, face up. And in my discussions with him, it became, I kind of had a realization that possibly, again, you can look at it as a lie, or you could look at it as an innocent you misspoke. But I've noticed that when he spoke with me about other things, even, that his ability to articulate his thoughts didn't keep up with the thoughts. And so I wonder if it's possible that he thought her face is down under the water, and it kind of came out wrong when he said it. Now, but then again, there were a lot of things he said that people thought were odd, or didn't fit, or didn't match. So is it possible, or is it stretching the limits of credulity for one person to misspeak or be misunderstood as many times as he supposedly was that night? That is something, again, that I want the readers of my book to decide for themselves.
Yeah. So what are some other things that people found odd, like no emotion? I mean, like.
Yeah, well, he isn't a very reactive guy in general. I've found that to be true during the times I have interviewed him in prison multiple times for the book. And his lawyers actually told him not to react. That's another thing. So I think that's actually common advice that lawyers give to people who are on trial. They say that any reaction can and will be held against you by the jury. I remember, because he was chewing gum at one point during the third trial, some people thought that he looked kind of too nonchalant. The trial's going on for weeks and he's chewing gum. Some people didn't like that. I mean, remember the criticism. Oops, bless you.
What's coming on?
And originally, when the first trial happened, there were times when he had a laptop computer on the desk, and they would kind of turn it away from him or turn it off even, so he didn't have to look at the autopsy photos. It looked like he was having a hard time dealing with seeing his wife of only 4 months in this manner. Autopsy photos are,
Yeah.
as you can imagine, very graphic. And some people, I remember, remarked to me, oh, look, he can't even stomach the effects of his crime. He did it. Then later, some jurors stated, oh, it bothered me that he looked at the photos by the third trial and had no reaction. Now, he's now seen these multiple times. So again, either way he looked at it, there were people who thought that that was guilty.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to see the reaction of people, and people's perceptions can both be, they perceive different behavior as both being guilty to the same situation. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I experienced that throughout this case, and not just this case, by the way, a lot of other cases. I've had people say things like, when a person testifies, if they sound too polished, well, it's rehearsed and they're really probably guilty. But if they don't testify, it's because they're hiding stuff and they're guilty. So there does seem to be a lot of predisposition to thinking people are guilty when they're charged. And a lot of times they are. Oh, believe me, the many cases.
Well, just thinking somebody's guilty is not enough.
Yeah, that's right. They're supposed to base it on the evidence. However, they're people too. And maybe they may not be aware that that's actually how they're leaning at the start.
So what was the evidence? That's what I haven't figured out.
Well,
to convict him, to put him in jail. Like, did they, I mean.
What was interesting is that one of the jurors I interviewed actually used this term. She said, I was waiting for that aha moment and it never came. She said that it was a bunch of little things that, quote unquote, didn't add up for her. For example, she thought that, the timing on the 911 call didn't match. They believed that she was actually face down, and that because of that, it didn't fit with certain other things, but he never testified, so he never got to go up there and say she was face up, as he's asserted to me and to other people many times. So
he did not testify.
No, he didn't.
Okay.
And there were a lot of people who wondered why. Well, again, you can view this as an excuse, or you can view it as a legitimate reason why a person might not testify. He does tend to kind of correct himself a lot, even more than maybe I do. There are some people who just don't make good witnesses. And
I just can't imagine if my husband died and I didn't do it, not testifying. I for myself, right? I can't imagine not wanting to be,
Right. I've heard that over and over again. However, another argument against that is you trust your lawyers. You don't know, if you've never been involved with the legal system, you trust the advice of your lawyers, and they say, either we don't need you up there, or we don't think it would be a good idea to put you up there. Because here's the problem in this case. He has to explain this 911.
Well, because there was discrepancies in the story. Right. That's why. So then that also leads you to wonder.
He's stuck with that. And then what if he messes up on the witness stand and he means to say one thing and then says another? And then plus, boy, when you get up there, they will grill you, right? And again, you can look at this either way.
Like a fillet.
But they're not supposed to consider. They're not supposed to consider the fact that he didn't testify for any purpose whatsoever. They're not supposed to hold it against the person. But there is still that deep-seated desire for someone to hear you say, I didn't do it. But then again, if you don't say it in a convincing way, or if you cry, what if you cry and, oh, it looks like an act? Or if you don't cry, oh, it's a cold-hearted killer. Either way.
They're judging you no matter what.
So it's hard to say. It really is. And so that's why I've gone back and forth, around and around in my own head. In fact, I describe in the book that I felt like my thoughts about this case were like pinballs ricocheting through a pinball machine. I just sometimes I would go over here and there, and I know I'm not the only one who has been tormented.
That's why I just don't see how they could convict him if there's that much doubt.
Well, it was interesting because the jurors that I spoke to, there was never a consensus even among the jurors as to how did he do it and not have all this water splashed around, and or just how did he do it and have the set of undisputed facts again, about the water not being everywhere in the bathroom.
I don't know. He slipped her a Mickey. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, like,
right,
did he
no,
put
no.
something in and she drank it down? Did they test her
Oh,
bloodstream?
yes, of course. They tested all of that. But then there were some tests that weren't done. There were no tests ever done to determine whether she had these health disorders. But then again, the defense, it took a while for these things to come to the surface and for the defense to start to raise these questions. And by the time these questions were raised, she had already been cremated, but she went through a second autopsy. That's another very unusual thing.
How fast did they do the cremation?
Well, I think if I remember right, it was kind of like more like the normal length of time. It wasn't like super fast. If I remember, I don't remember the exact time frame. I'm sorry.
Were the family okay with the cremation?
Well, the family of Sarah, according to Ryan, he said that they said, "You're her husband, you decide." And they initially were supportive of him. They were very supportive of him initially, and actually even argued for his bond to be lowered. And according to Ryan, they said, "You're her husband, you decide." They had only been married 4 months, so they'd never, talked about that. I mean, it's a reality.
Such a short time.
Yeah, it's a reality. It's all going to happen to all of us. But you don't want to sit there and talk about, gee, if I die, what should my funeral arrangements be? So
yeah, you wouldn't be thinking about that at 4 months into marriage.
Yeah, he told me that the way he decided was, if it had happened to him, if he had died, that he would probably have preferred the cremation. And there was also a practical consideration. There was no life insurance. So that's something else people ask about.
Money, yeah.
So financial. And, but now there's a situation where there's a lot of argument over tests that were not done. And the defense wants her DNA. They've been arguing over this ever since, pretty much since he was convicted in 2011. There's this court action that's been going on since 2014.
So why won't he let them have her DNA?
The prosecution, as I recall their arguments, is basically that even if she did test positive for some of these disorders, that doesn't exclude murder as a possibility for how she died. So
okay, now the coroner is the one that said it was murder. Why did he conclude that?
Well, there was a detective there at the autopsy with him who was at the scene, and he said that this detective didn't influence him that much, but there's a lot of speculation on the part of the defense team that maybe there was some influence there. It was literally very quickly, 12 hours after she died when the autopsy was done, and her brain was not preserved. This is kind of not too pleasant to talk about, but her brain wasn't preserved. And so they weren't able to do slices to tell which sections of the brain they were even looking at. So when the defense did their own autopsy, it's my understanding that expert wasn't able to even do any meaningful examination of the different sections of the brain that could show whether there were these different disorders. And here's the other thing. There was testimony that some people can have a first-time seizure or a disorder that would leave no sign after an autopsy.
Yeah.
It's possible.
So she could have just killed over in the bathtub.
Correct. And so there were injuries like in and around her neck that were viewed as very suspicious by the coroner. Those were the main ones that the coroner said convinced him that it was homicide.
There were injuries around the neck?
The neck and inside of her mouth and things. However, the defense experts, including a guy who testified for no money at all, he's an emergency room expert doctor, has been in this area for like 30 years, said he'd seen injuries similar to this just from efforts to do intubation, put a tube down the throat of the person who can't breathe. So they have to move the neck around to try to.
So it could have happened after the death?
Well, yeah, that is what there's an argument.
Even though the detective is saying it was like that when he got there?
No, there were no obvious signs of trauma to her body whatsoever when they first got there. So that's another mystery. But then when people die, unfortunately, later decomposition causes changes in the body, that bruises and other marks that aren't visible immediately after death do become visible. And there were marks around the neck, and her teeth had pressed into her lip and caused a cut inside. But once again, was this inadvertently caused during the prolonged 45-minute effort to try to save her life? Or was it something that he did to her? And there were some bruises on the one side of the head, but none of them were viewed as being a blow to the head that would have knocked her out, for example. They were very slight bruises, and there was also a bruise here on the forehead near the hairline. And it was interesting because the jury didn't get to hear this, but I found a document that said that a neighbor had seen her fall on a rake in the yard like a week before she died. And so that explains some of these bruises. You see what I mean? Every time I would look at a piece of evidence that seems suspicious, then something else might come to my attention.
Was the neighbor attractive? Maybe she was sleeping with Ryan. No, I was kidding. Sorry.
Oh no. Well, anyhow, there's no, reason to believe that anything like that was going on at that time. They literally examined these people's lives up and down, from what I understand, and from everything I've been able to review, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 pages. And that's probably a conservative estimate. I've dug. It's such a mystery.
What is the most surprising thing? Like, the reactions. What are the reactions of people about your book? What is the most surprising reactions you're getting?
Well, the thing I'm most surprised by is how many people say that they feel like they're there and they just can't put this book down. And then they've actually lost sleep reading it and then ruminating about it, just like I have over the years. The appeal of the book has been very, very broad. I've had a lot of people saying, I can't wait to read it. But then it's so sad, that it's such a sad story. Yeah. Yet people are enjoying learning about it only because it does cause you to think through all the different possible scenarios, and also teaches people some very unusual things about the justice system, how juries operate, and some kind of really sweet facts about these people's lives, and some sad facts about what I like to call the collateral damage of the case, which is people who had, if, for example, he did do this, his family members, her family members. Now, her family members have chosen to not speak publicly for quite a long time, and I can respect that. But, his family members, and even just members of the general public who became involved and supported him because they felt like the evidence just wasn't there.
Well, that's the one thing is I just don't understand how you can convict murder if you don't have any, like, if you're not, I personally would want to feel sure before I said, yes, guilty.
Well, they said that the jurors that I spoke to said that they did feel confident, but they didn't come up with a scenario that they all agreed on. There are all these different scenarios. Like during trial 2, I remember specifically a juror told me that one juror came in the midst of deliberations, like it went over the course of several different days, and another juror came in and said, I had it. It came to me in the middle of the night. He karate chopped her in the throat. And this particular juror I spoke to was reacting to that reaction and kind of went, really? I mean, that's what you came up with? And other people thought she was drowned in the toilet, even though there was never any evidence presented. Well, especially not in the third trial. There was no mention of the toilet being used as the murder place or the scene of the murder. And yet there were people who said, well, they thought that's how he could have done it. So they never said, and his brother, he has a twin brother, his brother put it this way when he spoke to me. He said, if they don't know how he did it or why, how did they convict him? He still doesn't understand that.
Well, I was going to ask what the motive was also.
Well, the prosecution did at one point after the first trial, and maybe I should explain too why there were 3 trials. There were 3 trials because the first verdict was thrown out because the jurors were doing these experiments on how long it takes their body to air dry. Trial 2, they deliberated for 30 hours, which is the longest deliberation anybody can remember in Warren County. And they still couldn't reach a verdict. It has to be unanimous. All 12 people must agree, either guilty or not guilty, or it's a hung jury if it's a split vote. Now, there are even disputes over what the vote would have been, because they didn't really take a vote, because they could just see that certain people were over here not agreeing and other people were over here thinking he did it. So then the third trial, it was 12 hours of deliberation, and then they convicted him. So even after that 12 hours, some people criticized that as saying that, you know, well, maybe it must have had their minds made up too quickly. From what I understand, the jurors in the second trial laid out all of the pieces of evidence and looked at each and every one. It is my understanding that in the third trial that they just kind of reviewed the testimony rather than looking at, there was a magazine on the floor. Was the magazine what? I don't know for a fact whether or not they went through every single piece of evidence or not, but there was a criticism of that third jury trial for the jurors not spending as much time to make the decision. And also, again, the different theories about what could have happened. And the jury didn't just go, well, we figured it out. Here's what happened. You know, juror A might say, I think it was in the toilet. And over here you have a different juror saying, you know, in the sink or in the tub or whatever. You know, there were all these different theories that came out. And the prosecution, though, did, after the first trial, try to say that there was some kind of, he had accessed some racy pictures online, and that maybe the wife was upset about this. But there was no evidence that this was accessed during the, when she was there at the house that night or anything like that, that they were never accessed then, and they were immediately deleted. So, you know, who's to say? Some people said, well, maybe they looked at them together. I don't want to go there. I wasn't involved in the line.
There's so many ifs, right?
Right. So that was the only thing, other than there was a witness in the third trial. And this is another one of those really strange things about this whole case. A woman from out of state got in contact with Ryan Widmer because of his story being on Dateline NBC national TV. And she claimed that he called her and confessed to killing Sarah, and that they had been fighting over that he had cheated. She didn't like him drinking. She didn't like him smoking, whatever. He says none of that happened. And long story short, all the jurors that...
Did we look to see if there was any kind of phone call records?
Well, there were phone calls. However, there was a discrepancy between when she said it happened one time when they talked to her, and then another time she said it was first she said it was in the middle of the night. Then they came to her with her phone records. The prosecution and the investigators said, well, there are no phone calls at all in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning. Which call was it? She pointed to one and she said, oh, I remember it was this one, 10 o'clock at night, my Iowa time, because that was the day before my daughter's birthday. Well, she said that she was asleep, and that's why maybe she thought it was later. Well, I found, and no one had ever found this before, there were 2 text messages that went from her phone to his phone immediately before that call. So unless there's such a thing as sleep texting, I say this in my book, how was it possible she was asleep when that call happened? And she was never asked about that on the witness stand. In fact, Ryan Widmer told me no one had ever asked me about those 2 text messages. So a lot of people look at these things that happened.
What would her motive be for lying about that, I wonder?
Well, you know, she was actually, unfortunately, she was a recovering addict, and she was on methadone. So that has been linked to some hallucinations. There was never any statement that this is what occurred in.
Why is he talking to a recovering addict anyway?
Because people from all over the country contacted him, and people have characterized him to me as being naive and trusting. And they've said that he actually felt like obligated, and he told me this himself, that he felt obligated to answer to every person who contacted him.
Wow.
Then when this person continued to stay in contact, he just thought it was courteous to respond. But there was something like 585 text messages sent from her to him, and you know, just a lot. And his version of the story is he just backed away from her because he sensed something wasn't something strange about there. She claims that they together decided they were not going to contact each other anymore. So again, I don't know what the truth is there. I can just
right.
what somebody was, and this is what the records show and what Ryan said to me.
Now,
So,
originally her family was Sarah's family was very supportive of Ryan,
correct.
but then they backed away.
Correct.
Do you have any idea at all what the reasons were behind the support and the withdrawal of support?
They never have stated specifically. I do know at the very first, when Ryan was accused, they actually went to the court hearings, and the brother of Sarah stood publicly and said, in our heart of hearts, we don't think he did this. And Ryan told me he sensed the family was slipping away from him, that their support was eroding around the time. I don't know when she was cremated specifically, but I do know it was a month after her death when they had a private memorial service with her cremated remains being buried, and Ryan did attend that. They actually delayed that so that Ryan could get out on bond and be there and everything. So I don't know why. I've always wondered about, maybe there was a piece of evidence that convinced them. But there was a close relationship between Sarah's mother and a police officer. And some people have speculated, I don't know whether this is true, that relationship may have played a role in changing perspective. I really don't know. And I don't want to speculate just because I'm trying to be respectful.
And you went to the prison several times and interviewed him in person. What was it like to go to the prison?
Well, as a reporter, I had been to prison to interview people a few times and to jail a few times to interview people. So I'm probably more familiar with that process than some people would be, but it was still kind of an intimidating process to go through the whole procedure of, signing up to go and visit someone in prison. You have to go through kind of, obviously a metal detector and security, and you can't take anything in there with you. I couldn't take even a pencil or paper in. They don't let you take anything like that in.
Yeah.
So I
makes you know you don't want to ever go there, right?
Well, when I was in the media, they actually did let me do that. We had to have permission. You had to write down your equipment list. Here's what I'm bringing in. The photographer had to say what she was bringing in. And oh, by the way, I did interview him in prison years ago as well. But that was the first time I ever spoke to him, was in 2011 when he was convicted the first time, or the last time, the third trial. And then the story just kind of percolated for years in my mind, and driving past all of these places that I live near.
Yeah, I wondered why you wrote the book.
I couldn't let it go. It just bothered me so much, and I wanted to try to answer as many of the unanswered questions as I could. I've told other people this. I have a file that says unanswered questions for this case. Still not empty. I've asked every question that I can. Some of the questions I don't think will ever be answered, unfortunately. It's just, the whole thing is so sad. It just bothers me a lot, because I think about, these were just ordinary people living their lives. People could just relate to them. There was no history of domestic violence or the police being called there.
Right.
Something that you could predict and put your finger on. And, just to have someone's life snuffed out like this, either by homicide or just by fate, is so sad. Happens all the time. But again, these people were so relatable for the public. And then the odd nature of Sarah's death, again, either by homicide or by fate, medical emergency, I guess. Very unusual either way. Very unusual either way.
Very unusual.
And mystifying. And I've often said this about this case. It touches your heart and just confounds your brain. That's what this case has done. A lot of cases that are out there, they're kind of more straightforward. Somebody shoots somebody, got the gunshot residue on their hands. It's a matter of They're guilty, but how guilty are they? Is it murder? Is it some lesser charge? Interestingly, Ryan was offered a plea deal by the prosecution prior to trial 3. A lot of people do not realize that. He turned it down flat. He wouldn't even hear his lawyers talk about it. He interrupted them and said, no, I am not pleading to something I didn't do. They go, listen, hear me out. No, he was adamant. So some people look at that and think, well, gee, maybe he is telling the truth. Maybe he didn't do this. Wouldn't he have grabbed at that chance? Or some people might argue he thought he could outsmart the system and get away with it. Again, everything in this case you could look at.
Yeah.
And that's how I tried to approach this book. When I think I told you this previously, Linda, when we were speaking, that I was reading these transcripts, 6,000 pages, and I would have memories come back to me, and I would remember, oh, I remember I reacted to this way. So I would try to put in my reaction and then what I remember other people saying or doing in reaction to certain things. I remember even people gasping in the courtroom at different times. And believe it or not, it was actually, even though it's a very serious case, there are times when people would kind of laugh just to blow off steam, you know, in such a serious case. There were some things that were a little bit, you know, humorous or unusual that happened. You know, for example, the one lawyer said, now it's not a real brain. He brought up a model of a brain. May I approach the judge with the unreal brain now? That was an actual quote from him. Little statements like that that were kind of, you know, people would laugh. But it's
Oh well, they're trying to make, you know, the gravity. It's a very grave situation, but they're trying to break that up a little, I guess. But
well, I think you develop a sense of like a gallows sense of humor when your job involves very serious police officers, for example, you know,
yeah,
will have kind of an
nurses in the emergency room.
yeah, things like that. And it's your way to cope psychologically because it will drive you crazy if you just
Right. You have to find like make some kind of light of it because it's so serious all the time.
one of the other very tragic things about this whole case is the death of Ryan's mom. She pretty much drank herself to death. And I described her whole demise in the book. And that is one of the parts that I have a hard time even talking about still.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Just because regardless of whether you think Ryan Widmer is innocent or guilty, you have to feel for that woman. You have to feel for Sarah's mom, her family, all these people.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And Jill Widmer, I didn't get to know her very well because there were gag orders in place, which prevented the main players from talking to me and other reporters as this was going on for most of this time. It was pending for 3 years in the court system. But Jill was somebody I actually kind of wish I had known because I respected what I knew about Jill. I had heard that, for example, she started as a secretary at Luxottica. Most people know in our area that it's a big, you know, the big eyewear company in Mason. And she worked her way up to being vice president as a single mom after Ryan's dad and Jill divorced. So to me, I have respect for her just knowing that. And people who knew her and worked with her talked about her sense of humor, but yet she was tough and how much she actually loved Sarah. She loved Sarah. And so she had a double whammy from the standpoint that she considered Sarah, she said, to be like the daughter she never had. She had 3 boys. And so Ryan gets put in prison and Sarah, what a horrible thing to experience, you know? So at the end of the day, still, despite all this sadness, it is my hope people can take this story and learn from it something valuable, whether it's just to appreciate that nothing like this has ever happened to your family. Maybe it's to think about if you end up being on a jury, would it help you to process the evidence in a different or maybe a better way? If you're a police officer, if your job relates to death investigation, to try to look at all sides to pin down those unanswered questions as best we can. So we're not twisting in the wind all these years later, wondering why.
What did you learn from it?
I learned that things, and this isn't just from this case, things that might seem simple on the surface rarely are. And this case is a prime example of that. When you first describe to people, well, it's a 24-year-old woman dead in the bathtub, husband was there with her. Oh, for sure he did it. It may not be quite that simple if you really look at all of the facts. Again, I've gone back and forth various times as I considered all of this, and it's just sad that we don't know more. And that's probably the biggest thing that I learned, is that I feel like that there are a lot of subconscious factors that go into a case like this on the part of everybody. The jurors, the people who do the investigation, the defense lawyers, the prosecutors. There's a lot that happens in the back of our minds that we're not even aware of, because by definition, you can't be aware of something that's subconscious.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a lot of subconscious involvement with any case like this.
Now, were there any surprising facts that have come up over, this long period of time that were not, known then?
Oh, actually, well, in addition to those text messages that I found a couple of things that were never explored during the trials. Found a document in the basement of Ryan's attorney's office. And I felt like I had just been smacked in the face, because it was apparently the narrative of Ryan Widmer that I'm actually going to release on my website this later. I've actually am in the process of doing this with his permission. I'm releasing his whole statement. And it says that she was walking on her tippy toes right before she goes upstairs to go take her bath. And Linda, as I do, since we're involved in physical fitness, that's not a normal thing for a person to do. And it makes you wonder, is there a neurological condition or anything like that?
Well, how did they know she was doing that?
Well, that's Ryan's statement, okay? And so I didn't just rely on him, though. See, here's the thing. Could he have been lying about that? Maybe, but I don't think so, and here's why. Because there would be no way that he would ever think that somebody like me would ever see this document that he wrote for his lawyers. And they didn't attach any significance to it or overlooked it somehow, so they never brought it up, ever, during any of the trials. I saw that some of these disorders that she was suspected of possibly having can involve partial paralysis of the legs or feet. And I went, whoa, that's chilling. Is that what happened? I don't know. I'd like to know.
Or was she sneaking away?
No, I don't think so.
You don't want someone to hear you.
He asked her, according to his notes that he wrote, why are you walking on your tippy toes? And she said, I love you. Make sure the doors are locked. I'm going upstairs. That's, again, according to him. Now, I didn't just take his word for it. I asked a friend of Sarah whether or not she'd ever seen Sarah do this, and she said she'd actually seen her do it. A family friend just recently, after the book came out, disclosed to me that a little over a week before Sarah died, she saw her doing this and then kind of fell what looked to be asleep, but she was so out cold that Ryan had to pick her up to take her inside this vacation house. And she was doing it right before that.
Really?
It's weird. It gets your mind going on. And so, again, I don't know what the answer is. I don't pretend to know. But
now, was she always doing this even before they got married, or was this only after?
When I tried to ask Ryan about that, you have to remember that it's now been 10 years since she died. And when I was interviewing him, it was 9 years. And he said He remembers that she would do it, but he couldn't. I said, can you think of any specific time? Like, was there a trigger, like something that would happen prior to this that you saw her doing that? And, you know, he could have made up something and just told me, but
I
it
mean,
seems
people poison people all the time. I mean, you know, I'm just saying, like, it happens. And so, like, you wonder, like, was she always a sleepy person before she met him? Because it's really odd after meeting him if it wasn't before him. That would raise serious question marks in my mind.
Well, actually, the sleepy part, I do know, according to one of her friends who testified, they both had testified they had fallen asleep in the bathtub before, but the experts established that, you know, just normal falling asleep rather than having a seizure or something like that, that you're going to
wake up.
Correct, you're going to.
Yeah.
And so, again, this is one of those other things in this case.
It's so, like, yeah.
The very first statement is, my wife fell asleep in the bathtub and I think she's dead. So is that a cover story for murder, or is that
just it the truth of what happened?
His perception of how he found her, since he knew she was sleepy a lot. Again,
yeah,
you can look at it either way. And that's the problem with this case. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are so interested in it. And just about everybody, this is the other thing you asked me what I learned, besides learning about the subconscious factors, things that one person thinks are important about this case, somebody else says, I don't care about that. They focus on this other set of facts that they think are important. So there's so many aspects to this. It's a crazy, sad mystery. And
well, all I know is that I know Janice, and she's probably her book's probably gonna be a Lifetime movie or something. I don't know, but I just feel it. And that you all need to go get a copy of Submerged and on Amazon or at the submergedbook.com and find out for yourself, because all of the facts, she has well researched this from all angles, and this will be a great read for you guys on a weekend getaway or whatever. So make sure to pick up a copy of her book. And I am so appreciative of your, you know, how you just couldn't let this story go, your heart that you had to write about this, and, you know, just, you know, the person that you are comes out when you're speaking about the case, and it shows your true, you know, character, I feel. And so I just appreciate that so much. I wanted to acknowledge you for that.
Well, I tell you, I really appreciated you having me on. It really was neat to talk to a friend that I don't get to see often, and to do it in this way. So thank you very much.
It was so cool, so super cool. And you guys, if you have any questions about the case, make sure to leave it in the Facebook live feed, and we'll come back and we'll try to answer it as long as it doesn't require any legal action. Just kidding. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so just keep in touch. What is your social media that they can, you know, get in touch with?
So on Facebook, they can find, I have a special page dedicated to the book. It's called Submerged. Ryan Widmer, His Drowned Bride in the Justice System, the same exact title as the book. And then also my website is www.thesubmergedbook.com. Now it's going to take you to the Janice Hisle, which is my name website. So both of those go to the same place. And I have a little bit different content. One of the things I would like to mention before we end, Linda, is that I did put a tribute on my Facebook page, the Submerged Facebook page, for Sarah on the anniversary of her passing. I visited her grave last year. I didn't get a chance to go this year. But even though I didn't know her again, I was touched by her.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Wow. So that gets me too, as well. So you guys just make sure to get a copy of the book so you can really read about this. And I hope and pray at some point that the truth completely comes out, so there's no questions anymore about anything, for the family, for Ryan, for Sarah.
True.
and for you, Janice.
Thank you.
And yeah, and that concludes this episode of the Sisterhood of Sweat. Make sure you guys go get a copy of the book. Thanks for listening, everybody.